name is Ben Herskowitz. I am a full-time traveler and also a digital nomad. I run my own business selling on Amazon while I travel full-time and create content about how you can travel for cheap and share the cool places that I explore. I have been running my business for 4 years and I have been a nomad for the last year, and I hope to continue to do that and share information about how you can do it yourself and live this life of travel. After 11 countries, 38 states, and 1 year of full-time travel, I'm finally going to share with you what 1 full year of travel cost me. So I'm going to break everything down month by month, and I'm going to break down the different categories of my spending, and basically I'm going to give you a full recap of the 1 year of expenses. Alright, so we are going to start off in January. So in January I converted my Honda CR-V into a living space with a bed, storage underneath, and the ability to cook in it also. So in January I left my house in Vermont and hit the road to go skiing all the way around the USA. My original goal was to go to every Icon Pass mountain around the USA, which is 31 different ones. So for the first month of January, it was me driving from Vermont down to West Virginia, up to Michigan, and all the way out to Colorado to hit different ski mountains. So for the entire month of January, I spent $1,264. I spent $591 on gas and fuel. I spent $573 on food, and then I spent $95 on other miscellaneous expenses. And so that was pretty cheap for month number 1 because obviously I don't pay for accommodation, staying in my car, and I stayed in hotels for about 10 or 12 nights of this month also, but those were all free because of credit card points. Next, we got February. So in February, I was still driving around in my car, and so I started that month of February in Colorado, where I skied there, and then I headed out to Utah. But before I headed out to Utah, I actually got hurt skiing in Colorado, and that ended my ski season. I ended up hearing about a meetup in Nevada through TikTok of other van lifers and people living in their cars or just enjoying the outdoors. So I took my car out there. I ended up meeting amazing people, and I traveled around California with them for the rest of the month. So for the entire month of February, I spent $945. I spent $495 on fuel. I spent $300 on eating out, and then I spent another $150 on miscellaneous expenses. Once again, I have no accommodation expenses. I spent a good chunk of the month just out in the desert and sitting around with our new friends and van lifers at campfires and hiking and all free activities. It was very doable at only $945. So for the month of March, I just finished with my van life caravan where we spent about 3 weeks together, and then I headed to San Francisco, and then from there I headed up to Yosemite. After that, I headed down to San Diego, and I had a flight in mid-March to Costa Rica. I spent the last half of the month in Costa Rica, and after getting to Costa Rica, I remembered how much I loved being abroad, and so within 4 days of getting to Costa Rica, I canceled my flight back to the US. So for the month of March, my expenses were $1,002. I spent $485 on fuel driving around. I spent $392 on food, and then on miscellaneous expenses, I spent $125. So April, this is kind of where my full-time being abroad started for the year, as I was in Costa Rica. And so with this, I no longer really have the free accommodation because now I'm staying at hostels most of the time, so I do have to pay per night. And so for the month of April, which was entirely spent in Costa Rica, my total was $1,631. I spent $613 on accommodation. I spent $467 on food. I spent $115 on transportation, $417 on entertainment. So this was things like yoga, going on certain tours, paying for surfboard rentals, and all of the kind of fun activities to do in Costa Rica. And then finally, I also spent $19 on laundry, which kind of happens when you're living out of a backpack. So the way I kept accommodation down in Costa Rica, because a lot of people struggle with this, I used the Salina Co-Live program, which basically I paid $450 for an entire month to be able to stay in Salina hostels in Costa Rica, and I was able to switch 3 locations throughout that time. So I did 10 days in Santa Teresa, I did 10 days in Manuel Antonio, and I did 10 days in Puerto Viejo. That brings us to May. This was my most expensive month of the year so far, coming in at $2,149 spent. This month was a combination between Costa Rica and Panama, and so the first couple weeks were spent in Costa Rica and Puerto Viejo, and then the rest of it was spent in Panama, split between Bocas del Toro, Boguete, and Playa Banao. So for accommodation, I spent $920, which was all made up of hostel stays, mostly with Salina. Then for food, I spent $481. For transport, which were shuttles to and from places and buses, I spent $278. For entertainment, I spent $445, which was surfboard rentals and other activities again, like yoga and tours. And then I had another $25 in miscellaneous expenses. All right, that brings us to June. So the very end of May, I flew from Panama back to the US. I flew to LA where my car was waiting for me. So in June, drove my car from LA all the way down to Houston in about a week and a half after meeting up with some friends in certain places. From Houston, I flew from Houston to Vermont to shoot a documentary, which hopefully you'll see the trailer later in the year. And then I drove with the documentary crew down to North Carolina, hung out with my friend there, and then flew to Florida. And that kind of was the month of June. And so for the month of June, I spent a total of $1,215. I spent $425 on fuel, as I did a lot of driving. I spent $458 eating out. I spent $235 on transport, which was mostly my flights, and then I spent another $100 on miscellaneous expenses. Now for the month of July. So I spent this entire month in Peru. I had rented an apartment in Lima, Peru for about a month, and so I spent most of the time there with a couple excursions out of Lima to Huaraz and Huacachina. My total cost for my 1 month in Peru, $1,963. I spent $656 on accommodation. I spent $728 on food. Spent $198 on Spanish lessons, which I did for the first couple of weeks while I was there. Then I spent $292 on transportation, which was my flight to Peru, and then a couple of bus transportations. And then finally spent about $89 on entertainment. I was very happy with only spending under $2,000 in this month in Peru, pretty much because I was eating out at very nice restaurants every night, and I was just pretty much eating out every single meal. Basically up until this point in the year, I really hadn't cooked for myself or bought groceries pretty much ever. And so the fact that I keep the cost pretty reasonable, I was very proud of. All right, so let's get into August. So my total cost for the month of August was $1,806. So the first couple weeks of this were still in Peru, and then towards the end, I ended up back in the US. My food cost for the month of August was $511. My accommodation cost was $615. Transport cost me $170. Then my entertainment cost was $260. My friend Josh came down towards the end of the month, and we ended up exploring the southern part of Peru, going sandboarding in the desert, and a lot of cool things. So that was kind of the entertainment part of those expenses. And then finally, I spent $250 staying 24 hours in the hospital after I got very sick in Cusco. So that was not a fun experience, but considering I spent 24 hours in the hospital, had an ambulance bring me to the hospital and get all kinds of medication, $250 was not that bad compared to American healthcare. The end of August, I got back to Vermont on August 28th, and on August 31st, I had my flight from Vermont all the way to Copenhagen, Denmark, and that started my Europe part of this journey. And so as of September, I spent the entire month backpacking around Europe. So what does 1 month backpacking around Europe cost me? So the month of September cost me $2,034. I spent $951 on food. I ate out for every single meal, but I also enjoyed some very good food. Then for accommodation, I spent $537. I spent $324 on transport, which was mostly trains, buses, and one flight. And then I spent $114 shopping and $109 on miscellaneous expenses. And that brings us to October. After spending the month traveling around Europe and seeing the countries of Denmark, Sweden, Germany, Poland, and Czech Republic, I flew to Dubai. And so I spent the month of October between Dubai and Istanbul. And so for that entire month of travel, I only paid $90 in accommodation. That is because I spent those 4 weeks staying at fancy 5-star hotels through the Hyatt chain with my Hyatt points. And they only cost between 5,000 to 8,000 points a night. And these were very luxury, high-end Hyatt hotels in Dubai and in Istanbul with beautiful amenities, beautiful views, and incredible food. And this helped me save a lot of money. But my total expenses for October were $1,665. I spent $927 on food, which I allowed myself to splurge a little because I was not paying anything in accommodation. Then I spent $310 on transportation plus flights from the different places. I spent $150 on entertainment. There were some tours in Dubai and some activities. Then I spent $90 on accommodation, and then I spent $117 on shopping. So $1,665 for 1 month of spending it in Dubai and Istanbul was pretty good price. Now let's head to November. I went to the country that I least expected to go to this year, which was Lebanon. And it also became one of my favorite countries of the year for its food, people, and things to do. So for that month of November, you'd be very surprised at this number, I spent $675. This is because the first couple weeks were in Lebanon, where I only spent about $450 total for all my accommodation, food, and transportation. And then the second 2 weeks of the year, I flew back to the US finally, and I ended up in Florida at my dad's house for 2 weeks. And so I didn't really spend any money there as I was with my dad. And so that kind of helped for the other 2 weeks of expenses for the month in November. So those $675 broken down for November, I spent $242 on food, $202 on accommodation. I spent $181 on flights and transportation, and I spent $50 on miscellaneous items. Finally, we're wrapping out the year of travel in December. I went from Boca Raton, Florida, which is where I was with my dad, up to Orlando, where I met up with my friend Cebu, and we went to Disney in Orlando. I had never done Disney before, so it was a really fun experience. And so we got to do that for 2 days. We went to Animal Kingdom and Universal, and those were both very expensive, as to why this month was close to $2,000. From there, I flew out to Houston to get my car, which has been sitting in Houston for the last 6 months, and I drove it from Houston all the way back to Vermont in about a week. And so you'll see costs there for gas and that journey. And then I ended the year back in Vermont about a year from when I started this journey. And so the total cost for December was $1,798, and let's break it down. I spent $492 on food. I spent $549 on entertainment, which was Disney World and that kind of stuff. Then I spent $150 on flight. I spent $272 in fuel to get from Houston back to Vermont. And then I spent $335 on car maintenance because my car had been sitting for about 6 months and it needed a few things done to it. All right, so here's what you've been waiting for. So the grand total for 1 year of travel, 11 countries and 38 states, $18,150. Now, I'm guessing you're pretty surprised by that number, and it just goes to show you that travel can be super affordable, especially if you are smart about it. So let's break down that $18,150. I spent a total of $6,689 on food. I spent $363 on accommodation. I spent $4,463 on transportation, so this was flights, trains, buses, and that kind of stuff. And then I spent $2,480 on entertainment. And finally, I spent $885 on miscellaneous expenses. So $18,150 for 1 entire year of travel. And I will make another video kind of going over budgeting travel and just different tips and hacks for how you can do it like this and make it very cheap for yourself. And this $18,000 was me spending money on most things, not really budgeting myself too much. I ate out for every meal, and I still lived a pretty lavish lifestyle for this year of travel. And so if you're someone that has way less money, you can do it for way less. But this is what my year of travel looked like and what it cost me for a year. And so with that $18,000 that I spent for the year, average rent in the US is usually $1,000 to $2,000 per person. And so I didn't pay rent the entire year. I was able to travel for almost the same price as you just paying rent in the US. And so something like this hopefully shows you that there's so many options out there and that travel is very affordable to you if you make some sacrifices like leaving your apartment and hitting the road as a nomad. On top of this, I'm also US based, so I am privileged that I have a US passport and I'm making money in US dollars, so that does help me. But for everyone, there's ways to do this on your own. So thank you for checking out this video, and if you have any questions about travel, how to travel cheap, about credit cards, any of it, you can talk to me on Instagram and also in the comments.